Hello everybody and welcome to our sixth and final Residential Tenancies Act update. Today we'll be covering off on bonds and I've got Sandra here joining me to talk about bonds.
Thank you, Michael. Hello everyone.
So bonds are one of those things that I suppose aren't really spoken about very often. They're those things that we obviously collect at the start of every tenancy and finalise at the end of every tenancy. But we haven't really had too much change in the way they've worked or the way they've operated. We've always had a requirement to finalise them within 10 days at the end of a tenancy. But obviously now with the new reforms, there are quite a few changes that we need to know about, and it's obviously important that you know about as well. So Sandra, I might hand over to you. Maybe if we can just start off by covering off on, what bonds are, what they've been used for, how they've operated in the past, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about how they're changing.
Yep, sure. So bonds are paid at the beginning of a tenancy, basically to protect the property while the tenant or the renter is occupying the property. So it's used for potential damages, cleaning of the property at the end of a tenancy, unpaid rent, and changes of locks if the tenant, or the renter decides to change the locks during the tenancy. So that's basically, it's a bond based on the 1 month's rent that the tenant and renter has to pay, and that stays there during the whole tenancy period. And then once we do a final inspection, once the tenant is vacated, we do a final inspection of the property, and we look for any damages. Fair wear and tear is, fair wear and tear, obviously we can't claim on that. But cleaning, if we feel that the property hasn't been cleaned properly, we can ask the tenant to go back and redo that, or we can engage one of our cleaners to go in and do a proper vacate clean. And if there's any unpaid rent, we can apply some of that bond to any unpaid rent.
Yeah.
So it's basically what the bond is for, is to protect basically the property while the rent is in there.
Yeah. So you touched on a couple of things there that I've kind of noted down. So 1 month's rental is a bond.
Yes.
We've always had that as kind of a standard rule. We've always kind of collected a month unless there's been some additional things that we've liked to request. So whether it be a pet bond, so asking for another couple of weeks rent, or just asking for 6 weeks rent if it's a furnished property or maybe a high quality property. I know there's always been a cap on the minimum rental before you can charge more than a month. So it was previously $350, but
well, now it's changed. There isn't a specific amount. I've just been reading through all the regulations. I think that they were sort of saying about $900 per week. If there's anything over $900, we can charge over and above the month's rent. But now even pet bonds, we can't ask for a pet bond. So that's you can only ask for a month's rent, or if it's over that $900 amount. If the owner is specific and wants more than a month's rent, we have to go to VCAT and apply for an order to VCAT to make an order to say for what reason the rental provider wants over and above the 1 month's rent, whether the property is whatever condition it is. It could be a heritage property, it could be for whatever reason that the rental provider wants extra bond to protect the property.
Yeah. So I suppose the main change there is that previously, obviously, we could charge more than a month's rent if we wanted to as a bond for properties up to anything over $350, which would kind of capture most properties really. Whereas now the change is that it only applies to properties over $900. So only those really high quality properties or large properties that we're collecting more than $900 a week is when we can ask for more than a month's rent.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Perfect. So what other changes have come into the way bonds are treated and handled by us?
So the other changes that have come in, now a renter can actually apply to the RTBA to have their bond released without the agent or the rental provider initiating that bond to be released. However, that doesn't mean that the renter automatically gets their bond refunded to them, because the bond money is put into the RTBA, the Residential Tenancy Bond Authority. They hold the funds there. So once the renter does make a claim on their bond that they want to refund, and they can only do that 14 days prior to them vacating, they can't do it any earlier than that, the RTBA will then alert the rental provider or the agency that a tenant is making a claim on their bond, and then we or the rental provider will have to either accept that they're happy for the bond to be refunded, or they can deny it or reject it.
Yeah.
And in that case, if it is rejected, by the rental provider or the agency, you have to go into some negotiation between the renter to the reason why we feel that they shouldn't be able to claim the bond, either because it's before the tenancy's ended, we haven't done the final inspection of the property, we need to make sure that the property is in good order and returned in good order and the rent's been paid up for any damages or whatever. So, yeah, you have to go into some negotiation then with the renter to say why, the reasons why we're not going to release that bond.
Yeah.
If you don't get into, if there is no agreement made by both parties, you've got 14 days of that process. If no agreement has been made, then the rental provider will have to go to VCAT, make a claim. And then it's up to the member of VCAT to determine, you know, whether it's valid for the rental provider to hold the money back or to be released to the renter.
Yeah, yeah. And important there to highlight, I think, the fact that the bond is held by the RTBA, so it's not something that we hold. Obviously, we collect it from a renter at the start of a tenancy, but it is sent, and there's a requirement to send that on to the RTBA within a certain number of days of the commencement of that tenancy. So we don't have control over what happens to those funds. It is left up to the RTBA as I suppose, the independent party to make sure that it is released. And and the rule has always been that you need agreement from both parties before those funds can be released to the renter or provided to the rental provider. I suppose the main change there is the fact that it can be initiated by tenants now, by renters now. So it's not something that could happen before. It always needed to be initiated by the agent or the rental provider. But that's obviously now changed. So really important for us to make sure that we're keeping on top of those claims as they're coming through, particularly those ones which I don't quite understand, but those ones there that are happening before a tenancy ends. Given that a bond is tied to the condition of a property, how a request can be made before the end of a tenancy is a bit baffling. But we obviously need to be mindful of that and making sure that we keep on top of them.
Yeah, well, we haven't come across any of those, and I don't think we will. Not unless you have a renter that you've been doing regular inspections at and you're confident that they will return the property back in good order and they're basically guaranteed they're going to get professional cleaners in there, and the condition of the property has always been immaculate while you've done your routine inspections. And that's why, you always should do your routines regularly, according to the Act. But that, I've never come across any of those scenarios, and I don't really think you would release a bond before the tenant's actually vacated the premises. Yeah,
no, exactly. That's great. Just a reminder, I failed to mention at the beginning, but Q&A is open. So if you've got any questions at all, other than the ones that I'm kind of drilling Sandra on today, if you've got any other questions at all that you'd like to ask, feel free to ask those through Q&A. We'll go through those at the end of the session if there are any that come through. So obviously there's the 14 days prior that they can apply, initiated by the tenant, and that everything can happen there okay. What does that, I suppose, what other changes have happened to bonds as part of the Tenancy Act changes?
So the only other part of the bond is making modifications to a property. Now a renter can make certain modifications to a property while they're in the tenancy, and they can be minor, not extensive modifications. So and you can ask for a bond for that, so a modification bond to if the tenant or the renter requests that. So, for instance, if they want to put picture hooks up, LED lighting, if they want to change the globes themselves to LED, low flow shower heads, if the tenant requests that and wants that to be put in, they can do that on of their own. This is all without consent. They don't have to ask for consent of the landlord to do these modifications. If they want to put up blinds themselves, hardware like safety gates for children, little safety gates against the wall, they can't be fixed to the wall, they'll just be with adhesive. Security lighting or alarm systems and cameras, but they're not allowed to be fixed to the property, they have to be removed, so a removable item. Window films as well, so any window film that they want to put on it for sun protection, but it can't be a fixed film on the window. Wireless doorbells and locks on letterboxes, so they can put a lock on a letterbox. So if they request those modifications, they can do that without consent, but if they've obviously requested us, if they want to do that, we can ask for a bond up to $500 or more to cover those costs.
Okay. Yep.
But when they leave, they have to make good. They have to put back whatever modifications they've done. So if they put pitch hooks on walls, they've got to make sure they patch that area up. And the lighting, security lighting, whatever wiring or alarm systems, however they've fixed it on the wall, they have to make good of that area. But if they do want to do other modifications, and consent for these modifications have to be requested from the landlord. So if there's any fixtures that they do want to put on a picture, maybe a heavy mirror on a wall that needs to be fixed to a stud in the wall, they'll need to have consent from the owner for that, because it's actually being fixed to the structure of the building. Painting of any room, so if they want to repaint, they have to ask for consent from the landlord.
Yep.
If they want a herb garden, they need to ask for consent. If they want fly-away doors or screens, these are modifications that the tenant can do, but they still have to ask for the consent.
Consent to do so.
Yeah. And yeah, if they want a security system, they can put that in themselves. It has to be professionally done by an electrician. And again, then you come to an agreement with the landlord. Once they leave, if the landlord is happy for them to leave those fixtures on there, they can.
Yeah,
but that's all a discussion that, you know, we sort of make with the landlord. Yeah,
no, that's great. So I suppose that for me, the main change you can see there is that it's starting to look a little bit more like commercial tenancies. So you have these, I suppose, modification bonds that apply to commercial tenancies. So if you move into a new commercial premises, for example, and you want to, you know, knock down walls and, you know, reshuffle the way they work, often a commercial landlord will ask for a bond to be held in trust so that, you know, things can be returned back to the way they are, or their original condition. If they're not, then that bond can be drawn on. So the same sort of situation.
Exactly. Here. Or if they do any damages while they're doing these modifications, that's where the bond can sort of cover those areas. Like if it's accident and put a hole in the wall where they don't want to, just to make that area good again and repair it.
Yeah, no, so that's great. So I suppose whilst we say that we can only collect a month's rent, as a bond, there are obviously exceptions where certain things are being done to the property, which is where a bond would be used to repair those sorts of things as well. So again, you know, I look at the role of us as agents in this. It's really important for us to then start identifying modifications that have been done to properties throughout our routine inspection process. So obviously we're quite strict on doing our routines every 6 months here in Real Estate. So making sure that when we go and do those routine inspections, we are checking for, you know, an extra picture that might be up on the wall, or someone may be wall mounting a TV or painting a wall purple or whatever it might be. Just making sure that we're picking up on those changes as they're occurring. And look, I'm pretty confident in saying that the team are really good at picking up on those little things. Obviously, we look out for cleanliness as part of the routine, but if we start seeing things like modifications happening to properties, we always have and will continue to do it. Have a conversation with the tenant around, you know, their responsibilities when it comes to doing that.
That's right.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, great.
Yep.
And then what about the lodgement process? Has that changed at all for us? Are we, you know, the way we lodge bonds, has that changed? I mean, obviously we do them electronically, which we've been doing for a while now, but
yeah, no, that hasn't changed. You can only accept a bond once a tenant has basically entered or accepted the agreement, the lease agreement. It has to be signed. So you can't ask for a bond prior to that process. But yeah, basically they pay the bond, we lodge it with the RTBA. The tenant will get notification from the RTBA of the bond amount, the property address. They have to acknowledge that and accept that transaction. And once that's accepted, then the money gets withdrawn from our trust account and goes straight to Residential Tenancy Bond Authority and held there for the whole term of that tenancy.
Yep. Yeah, and one question I had, and again, just a reminder, Q&A is open, so if you've got any questions, please do ask them. Apologies, that was some questions coming through on my iPad before, which is all the noise that was happening. What happens with the money that sits in trust? I've always, I know, you know, when I first, I suppose, came into the world of real estate, I wondered what would happen, because obviously there's pretty significant amounts of money that get held there with the Residential Tenancies Bond Authority. What happens with the interest that gets earned on that money? Is it, you know?
I think it goes into a property fund, and that money then stays there accumulating. And if forever an agency defaults and uses misappropriates funds, that money can be used to basically to refund, you know, the tenant or the renter, or pay for whatever costs involved to recover that money.
Yeah, sorry, this is probably a question without notice, but yeah, it's one of those ones. I think it's an important thing to understand that. and I know we often get the question, what happens with the bond money? It does sit at that external authority, and that interest on that money gets used for things like, you know, rectification works and things. And I have seen something recently where I think the like the Real Estate Institute will apply for funding for certain types of projects and things that are happening as well.
Yeah.
But it needs to be approved by obviously Consumer Affairs, who oversees the whole thing.
Yeah.
So.
And sometimes, I mean, we get audited every year, as all real estate agents do. And one thing that they do audit is all the bonds that we hold against our agency, and they'll question us on, you know, is that correct? Are you holding that many properties, and are you holding that many bonds? Like, all the bonds are they valid? The tenancy is still there, and if not, you've got to explain, for whatever reason, if that bond is, or that tenant's left, or you no longer manage that property, why is it still sitting against your RTBA register? And it could be because that you change of management, or an owner wants to take it over themselves and they haven't done the proper transfer. We may have done our paperwork and transferred the bond over, but it hasn't been completed on the other end. So then they haven't acknowledged, and that money still sits against our agency. Again, we can't claim that money because you need two parties to agree for any bonds to be released, but money can still sit there because, yeah, a tenant may not have acknowledged a bond. They might have gone overseas and we can't contact them. So it'll just sit there until, yeah, one day they come back, or we go to VCAT and make a claim, or again, another agency hasn't done their due diligence and acknowledged the transfer of agency. And the bond just sits there. But again, it'll just sit there indefinitely, basically. Until.
And I know we've had some come through recently where, you know, we're waiting on a VCAT hearing for a bond and compensation claim or something, and they're, you know, I know they're waiting on those. Well, there's some that we've made 6-12 months ago and still haven't even got a hearing date yet. So,
it's just waiting there to be, finalised.
They just sit there and wait.
And again, we can't do anything unless we either go to VCAT or the renter returns, and then says, oh, you know, I want my bond back, and then we can start that process again and making an agreement of why the bond's still there and why we haven't released it.
Yep. Great, perfect. I'll just double check to see if there's any questions that have come through. I haven't seen any. No, so no questions at this stage. Okay, perfect. Well, if there's no further questions, we might leave it there. Thank you, Sandra, for showing us through or talking us through the changes to the bonds. Another pretty significant reform that we've seen. And I'd like to also take this opportunity, given it's our last session on the Tenancies Act update, just to thank everybody in the office who's contributed to making this series of 6 sessions a success. Obviously, all of the people from the Property Management Department who have given up their time to, you know, contribute to the live sessions, all the work that's happened in the background to try and get these the forms that are being sent out and the emails to all of you as well. There's a pretty considerable amount of effort, I suppose, translating the information that comes from places like Consumer Affairs into some normal plain language that we all understand, and then obviously dressing it up into something that, you know, we call internally our cheat sheets, but really a great reference guide for everybody to really have a pretty, you know, concise piece of information that they can refer to. And also to a couple of people that sit here behind the scenes, so Imani and Yuli, who you can't see, but they're just out of camera here, and they're running everything for us at the moment. So doing a fantastic job, making sure that all of these sessions run to time and make sure they're all ticking along as well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for everybody that's watched it and provided us with feedback. And we look forward to catching up with you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.